everyone, and welcome to the SBK Betting Podcast, an Aintree Festival preview. Yes, the 2023 running of the Grand National is upon us. And as always, our trusted pundits and racing aficionados, Ross Miller and Tom Collins, are on standby to take us through their selections on the best of the supporting races. And there's some seriously cracking races outside of the National itself. We'll build up slowly to the National and keep you waiting until we get to the main feature itself and have a proper look at the National this year. We're recording still a few days out from our final declarations, but I think we've got a pretty good idea of the runners and riders, potentially some changes with the riders, but definitely most undoubtedly the runners that we've got for the Grand National itself. There's an extra week in between Cheltenham and Aintree this year, which is likely to benefit all the trainers hoping to back horses up from one to the other. Many play by the rule not to back a horse who's run at Cheltenham and then trying again at Aintree. They're very different tracks, of course. Some have been saved though. Some horses are fresh for this meeting, and that's always very interesting as well. Ross, I'll just start with you. I love Aintree. It's a cracking track, and of course the National fences give that extra bit of edge with the National, the pinnacle. Has it been a successful betting meeting for you over the years?
Generally it has, but largely because I tighten the purse strings fairly tight after Cheltenham with a view to this, and I think the extra week will certainly help trainers. I'm not sure it's going to help us punters, because I think it just adds that, you know, if you go by the hard fast rule, which I normally have done of just not following in from Cheltenham, that extra week just might make that not such a sort of a hard fast rule. So for me, it's definitely tread carefully, enjoy the racing, and sort of really tiptoe carefully with the staking of the bets.
Yeah, and obviously the National itself is such a lottery. And I always think when you get to the National itself, no, there are no rules. You know, if you just like a horse by its name or its colours, like fair enough, go for it. Because anything can happen. It is a lot of luck involved. But we're going to get to that. We have got 3 days. We're going to start with a Thursday, and a pretty epic Thursday, it has to be said. We've got 4 Grade 1s. We're going to start with the Manifesto Novices Chase. It's the 2 mile, 4 furlong contest. There is a small field, and we've got the declarations for Thursday now, so we know exactly who's going to turn up. And what about this? The Turners Novices Chase winner Stage Star. We've got Banbridge, who was tipped up by Ross and TC on this pod for Cheltenham, but was a late non-runner in the Turners due to the soft ground. He gets his conditions, plus his form has been franked by El Fabiolo, who he was behind the last time winning the Arkle. We've got Saint-Ouen, who was third in the Arkle as well, and it's completed by Shorefan Jack and Visionarian. TC, Banbridge, have you been waiting patiently for him to come back now, or are you going to side against him?
Yeah, well, they say in horse racing and sports punting in general, never chase your losses. Well, I'm chasing an anti-post bet that went straight in the bin after Banbridge was taken out of the Cheltenham Festival. I was really hopeful that he was going to run really well last month, in March at Cheltenham. But as you say, he was taken out. Now he's got his ideal conditions in a small field, which he relishes. I've got to go in again. It's going to be a loyalty bet, but also a head and heart decision at the same time, because I think this horse is just the best in the race anyway. As you've touched on, his form was franked by El Fabiolo, who romped home at Cheltenham. And in here, he's facing, yes, Stage Star, who won well at the festival, but at the same time, he's no El Fabiolo. The step back up in trip will suit Banbridge. He's going to get the freshest ground as well on Thursday. There is weather forecast for Thursday, Friday and Saturday intermittently, but as this is the opening race of the meeting, he's going to get fresh ground. So there's no worries there. My only doubt with Banbridge is that he was sent off 5-2 favourite in the Sefton at the Aintree Festival last year, and he completely bombed out. However, that came on the back of an unbelievable performance at Cheltenham. Maybe he was just, one, it was a quick turnaround. Maybe he bounced or ran flat. And that's not going to happen again because he didn't run at Cheltenham this year. Or two, maybe he didn't like the track. I'm hopeful that it's the first option there and that it was the quick turnaround that got him beat. If it was the track, then he'll probably lose here. But I've got to be with Banbridge.
Yeah, it was the Sefton, wasn't it? And there was a big field. I'm just looking at what the comments with the trainer, Joseph O'Brien, after said that horse was unsuited by being crowded for room on a number of occasions. He is a horse that has done particularly well in small runner fields. We've seen him win 6 runner races before. And he probably just isn't still that quite straightforward. He's still like learning how to race. Potentially a year on his back, it might help him mentally as well. I just think, nice and fresh, ticks a lot of boxes. just looking at Stage Star, was that a tough race for him where he led all the way round? Paul Nicholls likes to hope and think that that extra week is definitely going to benefit him. Ross, do you like the two in the top of the market? You're looking elsewhere?
I'm looking elsewhere. I do like Banbridge. I've just sort of looked at the weather forecast, and my forecast, which is normally pretty accurate, is saying it could be up to 25 mils of rain before Thursday on good to soft ground. I think that could send it the softer side of good to soft. And I take on board what TC says, and it's the first race, it'll be fresh ground. But I think Banbridge is very ground dependent, and just at a short enough price, it would put me off him, coupled with the fact that he did underperform here last year, although I do think you can put that down to having a tough race in the Martin Pipe at Cheltenham before. Stage Star, I just think he got the run of the race last time. I don't think that will happen with Banbridge, and I think Banbridge is going to be fresh. He's quite a free-going horse, so I could see Banbridge upsetting Stage Star. Sam Roy, I can't see this trip being for him. It doesn't look to me like he was crying out for further when he was sort of wilting away in the Arkle. So actually at a big price, I'll chance Visionarian. He's got decent form on soft ground. He was a really good fifth in the Guinness Hurdle at the Galway Festival over 3 miles. He's won a grade 3 over 2 mile 2, and he's got 2 1/4 lengths to find with Sam Roy from their meeting at Leopardstown over Christmas over 2 mile 1, where he was given quite an aggressive ride. I would expect to see him ridden a bit more conservatively here, given that there's a bit of pace in the race. He'll light the ground. He'll definitely stay. And I think there's a question mark over a couple in this as whether they will stay. So I'd take him at a big price against a couple more fancied rivals.
Yeah, he's definitely the outsider of the field, isn't he, Visionarian? But a nice case to be made for him there. I'm with TC with Banbridge. I think he's going to probably go off near a favourite. Obviously, a lot of respect for the Cheltenham Festival winner, but there's plenty of reasons to believe that the freshness of Banbridge and what might have been had he been, had he run at Cheltenham, he was definitely fancied, wasn't he? And Joseph O'Brien, he tends to get his horses right for this meeting. They tend to go well as well. So yeah, let's TC and I will be backing Banbridge for that opening contest and Visionarian for Ross. Okay, that's a very, very good way to start the Aintree Festival. The Juvenile Hurdle is also a good race. We saw an epic finish in this last year, and it's a slightly better betting heat than our previous contest with 11 runners declared. So got some each way value in here, and we've got, as expected, a Willie Mullins favourite in Zenta. Now, he was responsible for the first 3, was it the first 4 home in the Triumph Hurdle, and Zenta is the best of those that is going to appear in this. Despite her relative inexperience, she ran a massive race to finish 3rd, and unsurprising really, especially with the sex allowance, that she's likely to go off favourite. Then you've got potentially the strongest opponent from our side of the seas. That's Bo Zenith. He's in there. Nuzret for Joseph O'Brien. He's already been over to the UK and put a lot of our better juveniles into one place. Scriptwriter is in here as well. Is on a bit of a recovery mission. Gravel, Perseus Way. There are horses, as we've said, we'll be talking about this for the majority of our preview, TC, that will be fresh, that won't have done Cheltenham. And I think especially if any kind of horse that might feel the effects of it would be a juvenile who's had a tough run in a big field, with very testing going conditions. I have to say, I thought Zenta was very visually impressive considering her inexperience. Would it concern you that this might come too soon in such the early stages of her career?
I definitely think she's the horse to beat in here. And I'm just going to preface what I'm about to say with there is no bet and no pick in this race for me at this stage. And there probably won't be a bet on the day either. Juvenile hurdles generally aren't my bag unless I really fancy something, and I just don't in here. I think Zenta is the horse to beat. As you say, she ran a very good race behind Lossiemouth at Cheltenham. That Triumph Hurdle developed into a sprint in the closing stages. I can't remember who it was, but someone on Twitter put up sectionals over the course of the week, and the Triumph Hurdle was the quickest final 3 furlong sectional over the whole week. So it was a proper sprint. Zenta's obviously got a lot of speed, but maybe that flattered her slightly. That's a slight question mark there for me. And also, fillies just generally don't tend to win this race. They have done twice in the last 10 years. Apple's Jade back in 2016 Willie Mullins trained her, and Willie Mullins obviously is represented by Centre this time around. And Unique as well back in 2013 won, but that was a terrible renewal. So fillies generally don't win the race. You've got to factor that in. She's a short price. She's probably the horse to beat on that Triumph form, but at the same time, I am slightly concerned with the reasonably quick turnaround, 2 tough races, and that race at Cheltenham probably took a lot out of her. Other horses in here that I want to mention, Beau Zenith. I actually backed Antipost for the Triumph. He didn't end up going there. But he's an interesting horse if he bounces back to his French form, albeit Blood Destiny, the horse he beat that day, has been disappointing the last twice. And then I was at Kempton for the Adonis when Nusrat won, beat Perseus Way that day, and Scriptwriter was miles back in the field. Now, Scriptwriter jumped terribly, really badly, and you'd expect him to jump better at Aintree. And if he does, he's a player for the same connections that won this race last year with Knight Salute. Nusrat is probably the smallest hurdler I've seen in a long time, but that doesn't take away from his talent. He was very good that day. And despite the fact that Perseus Way made a mistake at the last, I think Nusrat probably would have won anyway. Those two are very closely matched and should be around the same price. So on that basis, Perseus Way at 12-1 compared to Nusrat at 11-2 could be the value. But as I say, I'll be sitting this out from a punting perspective.
Yeah, fair enough. Not for everyone. There are a lot of, I'd say, concerns, but a bit slight sort of reservations I've got for several of these. Scriptwriter is a funny one, isn't he? That was so disappointing last time. Potentially, you could just draw a line through it and say that wasn't him, because we've seen him being a really gritty horse who's done a lot of racing, Ross. And it was amazing, really, what Knight Salute was able to do last year after running poorly in the Triumph hurdle and then coming in dead heated Pied Piper. Milton Harris is brilliant about getting these horses back, and I do like the fact that he's got a lot of good racecourse experience to his name, as is Nusrat. They've raced plenty as flat horses as well, so that might hold them in good stead. Nusrat is fascinating, being a colt. If he wins a Grade 1, he could turn out to be, a brilliant stallion if they wanted to close the door on the racing game. It's just another interesting layer to the story, and I think winning a Grade 1 would do that. How do you read the race?
I think TC's got it spot on, to be honest. It's not a race I'd be keen to get involved with. I think there's too many imponderables. I do think Zenta is just short enough. I think you're right. I think of all the horses that will take a bit of time to get over a race, normally the younger you are, the longer it takes you to get over it. Add on top of that she's a filly. I just, at the prices, would want to oppose her, and I won't be surprised if she wins. I think this slightly easier track might just suit her as well. Perseus Way, he just can't jump. He really can't, and it does tend to be a bit of a theme actually with Gary Moore trained juveniles. I often think they're not the most fluent over their hurdles, so I can't really have him on my mind, and he's coming on from a fairly attritional Boodles. Beau Zenith, I thought, TC would have been crying to watch this one sluice up at Stratford, as it was, I think 2 days after Cheltenham had finished. But he seems to have improved for better ground. As I said earlier, I'm working on the basis this isn't going to be that better ground he's improved for, so that would concern me, because he bombed out quite badly on his UK debut at Sandown when the ground was soft. So by process of elimination more than anything, really, it's Nusrat. He comes here fresh. He's already got the beating of these. I think TC's right. I think he'd have beaten Perseus Way at Kempton anyway. And I just think this flat track will suit him. Arriving fresh, it's a decent enough price against a short price favourite that I've got questions against. So I probably would be the same with TC, sitting on my hands watching this. But in terms of advising a locally winner, I think he.
Okay, Nusrat around about 11-2 or so for this juvenile race. Yeah, I think the more I think about it, the more I sort of talk myself out of Zenta. I did love what she did, and she was one of my horses to take away from the festival. But I just feel, if anything, I would have been very happy to have not seen her run again until next year and see her develop into a horse for next season. But, it is Willie Mullins. He does like to keep them going. And actually, I don't think he's going to have that many horses running at the Aintree. Obviously, he'll have them running, and he's got plenty for the Grand National. But in general, his Grade 1 horses, he doesn't have a huge amount turning up. A lot of them go to Punchestown, but I think he thinks that, he probably wants to split a lot of them up because they all finish together in the Triumph. So they think Zenta would have a good opportunity here. I like her, but I agree that her price probably is skinny enough. Greyvale interests me. She's another filly in the race. Now, she was subject to some questionable race riding in the listed fillies juvenile hurdle at Doncaster in January, which she won. Paddy Brennan caused all sorts of interference, which wasn't the best watch. He got 6 days, but fair to see the filly win, and I think she would have won regardless. She's still very green and far from the finished article, and the form isn't anything special either, but she is learning on the job, and she was much better in terms of her way that she went through the race when she won a similar event at Huntington at the end of March. This is definitely a lot tougher. And she's out of just her own sex and in an open company. I wouldn't want her to be any shorter than 8 or 9 to 1, really. She's just in a race which I think is quite open. She could be an interesting contender here for Fergal O'Brien. So that's a look at the juvenile race, which is another of the grade 1s. Right, moving on, let's go to the Aintree Bowl, the 2:55 contest on Thursday, 3 mile, 1 furlong, and this is mouth-watering. 6 have been declared. We have a fantastic Gold Cup runner-up in the shape of Brave Man's Game, and then we've got 3 who are also in the race, 2 that ran brilliant races without actually finishing in A Plus Tard, who was pulled up after being impeded when a hoist and yaw came down. They're in the field, and we've also got the 3rd place horse Conflated as well. Throw in the Ryanair runner-up, Shishkin plus Galore. This is cracking. I'm really looking forward to this race. Plenty that we can throw in around. I suppose, as we've said, we've touched on, we've got these horses, whether a lot would have taken out of them the runs at Cheltenham. But essentially here, you've got horses that have all turned up in one shape or form at Cheltenham. So there's nothing fresh. Who do you think, Ross, of all of these is going to come into this with the best sort of prep in from those runs at Cheltenham?
I mean, this is a really exciting race and a really interesting race to try and pick apart. It breaks my heart and it really does actually to not tip Shishkin and not be fully in his camp. And actually, if he'd have pulled up in the Ryanair, when I think most people thought he would do, I'd really fancy him for this. The fact that he actually managed to finish second is what puts me off, because I think he must have just had the most brutal race. I mean, the guts and determination to run on from where he did, having jumped badly, never really travelled, just worries me that it's going to have left a mark on him. So from a very analytical point of view, not always my my MO, I just can't be advising him. Brave Man's Game definitely had a hard race in the Gold Cup. And I think we saw yesterday with Royal Pagaille, who never really got involved in the Gold Cup, but he barely raised a gallop, I didn't think, yesterday in the Irish Grand National. So I think Gold Cup form is something I'm looking to avoid. So Brave Man's Game can scratch him off. Hoyt and Yaw fell perhaps before he'd really got to the bottom of his reserves, but Derek Fox is missing and Brian Hughes takes over. Perhaps a bit mean to say this about a champion jockey, but I just don't see a Hoyt and Yaw and Brian Hughes as a match. Although I think we have to say that Lucinda Russell and Peter Scudamore would know the horse better than me, and they've clearly gone and chosen the jockey they want. But Derek Fox rides with a very long length of leg. Hoyt and Yaw rolls around. He looks like a big old boat to try and control. Using your legs is quite important. Brian Hughes rides a bit more like a flat jockey. I just don't see that working out. Conflated as a horse I just don't like. So that leaves me with A Plus Tard, who got hampered and pulled up perhaps before he got to the bottom of his reserves. And I did think he showed enough to suggest that he wasn't completely done with the game after his sort of bomb out at Haydock back in the autumn. He jumped, he travelled, he got hampered, his race was gone from there. He was always on the back foot, was never going to get back into it. He's got to prove that he likes Aintree. But he's a classy horse, and if he's anywhere near his best, he's going to beat these.
Okay, fair enough. Look, there is, I think, so much to be said for A Plus Tard. I was a fan ahead of the Gold Cup. I thought he was looking like the old A Plus Tard, which we know loves coming back to Cheltenham, and he's run so well there before. And actually, Rachel Blackmore and Henry de Bromhead were delighted with him as well, despite the fact that there's a P to his name, which I know TC, you don't like seeing any letters to any horse's name when you're looking to tip them. But I think it's an unfair P, really. It's the horse was never going to have an opportunity after being so badly impeded, and he's incredibly lightly raced this season, as is Brave Man's Game. You should say that, but he really didn't have if any of the horses didn't have a tough race, it would have been A Plus Tard compared to some of the others. It's interesting what Ross thinks about how much it would have taken out of these horses. The Gold Cup looked like one of the best that we've seen for a long time. would you rather be with a horse that's come out of a Gold Cup or a Ryanair like the likes of Galore and Shishkin?
It's a very tricky race, I think, just to assess in general, just not because you're comparing the two races, but also comparing how they ran at Cheltenham. You've got some horses that didn't perform at all, e.g. didn't finish the race, A Plus Tard at Hoyson-Yor. You've got some horses that had extremely hard races. I completely agree with Ross on Shishkin and Brave Man's Game. And then you've got other horses in here conflated who I think still open to further improvement, and Garlaw who's just not good enough. So it's a very difficult race to assess, and that's why the market is so wide open for a small field. Shishkin, I thought there'd be blinkers for this race, and there aren't. I thought the tongue tie would stay on, and it hasn't. The tongue tie's off. So there are 2 question marks there with him. A step on the trip, I think, will be fine, but he looked a bit reluctant early on, and that is a slight concern. I know they'll go slower in this race than they did in the Ryanair, but I just want to see a horse have that, that spark to actually want a race in the early stages, and Shishkin didn't have it. Again, I would love to see him win as a neutral, but I won't be betting him. Brave Man's Game. We know I've got polarising opinions on the Gold Cup to virtually everyone else in the horse racing industry. I don't think he stayed, and I think he had an exceptionally difficult race. He was walking up the hill. 27 days later to come back and potentially win the bowl at Aintree will be some feat. And I just don't think he's got it in him, though I do think this track suits him better as the distance as well. A Plus Tard, again, polarising view. I thought he was actually beaten at the time that he was hampered. Now, I know he was still tanking along or cruising or however you want to define it, but he was much further back than Rachel Blackmore would have wanted to be at that stage of the race. I just think she was niggling away at him. Maybe he'd have featured in the finish, but I don't think he was travelling as well as he has in previous Gold Cups. And off the back of 2 Ps, I'm more forgiving with a pulled up than I am with a fall or an unseat or brought down, whatever. But on the back of 2 Ps, I can't bet him in this race at around 9-2. Hoyson-Yor, I've said all year that he's an Aintree horse, and I'm going to back him again at Aintree this year. But again, with a fall next to his name, that puts me off. And I also agree with Ross about Brian Hughes. I think Derek Fox is key to this horse, and he unfortunately cannot ride. So if he drifts out to 7-1, then I will have some cash on a Hoyson-Yor and break my own rule. But unfortunately, at the price right now, I won't be. So it's just conflated, a process of an elimination for me. This is a horse I've really loved over the last couple of years. I thought they should have gone to the Ryanair at the Cheltenham Festival, but he ran very well to finish 3rd in the Gold Cup. Maybe that takes its toll on him here, and he's not the same horse. But he finished 2nd in this race last 12 months ago behind Clan des Obeaux. A repeat of that effort will be good enough to see him there or thereabouts, and around 5-1, I think is a very fair price.
And that came after falling 2 from home at Cheltenham in the Ryanair, and then he ran a big race to finish 2nd, didn't he? So he's I think he's improved this year. Clearly, we saw that at Leopardstown when he won the Savills. I find him difficult to get too overexcited about. Something about conflated. He just doesn't do it for me. He doesn't have that X factor that a couple of these others have. I think Shishkin is just edging favouritism to Brave Man's Game, which I can't really work out, to be honest, considering what Brave Man's Game has achieved this season and how unpredictable Shishkin can be. I'm going to have to disagree with you about the A Plus Tard assessment. I think he seemed to me to be more of himself. And I think that was just the way that Rachel Blackmore wanted to ride him quite quiet. They went out quite quick out in front, and she was given the opportunity when she got impeded in and around her after a couple of fallers in front of her. So I'm with A Plus Tard in this field. It's a really interesting race to pick apart, and I hope that we get. I hope every horse shows up and at their best as well, because we love seeing them, and it's great that connections feel like they want to give it a go after what could have been quite tough runs at Cheltenham. So we'll see how the Gold Cup form stacks up as well. It's always fascinating to see. Okay, look, that is a spin through some of the best races. Obviously, we've missed one out in the shape of the Aintree Hurdle. Constitution Hill will be back potentially for the final time over hurdles, and he faces 5 rivals. Look, great that we've got him back. It's going to draw in the crowds. I've said to plenty of people, if you're not going to watch one race, if you're going to watch one race outside of the Grand National, watch Constitution Hill. He is our rock star in this sport at the moment, and we really, really do need him. And look, if he turns into whatever type of horse next year over fences, even better. Unless there's anything that's going to deny him, I'll get Tom and Ross to throw anything else out if they've got any other queries or thoughts about his opposition on Thursday, or unless there might be anything else from the day, because we're going to do other races just if there are any other fancies. But TC, Ross, anything to add to Constitution Hill?
He wins. That's all I'm going to add here. It's just not a punting race, is it? 1 to 5. Maybe if you want to buy some money and you're a big punter, then he's the horse you want to back. But I'll be having no bet in that race whatsoever, not even a forecast. It just doesn't interest me from a punter point of view. And no other bets on the Thursday card for me.
Okay, well, Ross, maybe, unless you don't think he's going to do it, maybe how far he wins by in this field?
He'll win by 10 lengths or more.
I'm sure there's a bet for that around. Like he did it without having to think really, bar the fact that he sort of made everyone jump a little bit at that last hurdle. He's going to be an easier jumping display, you like to think, at Aintree anyway. But that's Constitution Hill. What a breathtaking day's racing we have on the Thursday at Aintree. Okay, we'll move on to Friday. We'll start with the Mildmay Novices Chase. As I mentioned, we do have declarations for the Thursday. We still are just got the 5-day entry list for everything else from Friday and Saturday. So there's still a bit of guessing. And it's interesting with this race, the Mildmay Novices Chase, because at the top of the betting as it stands, you've got 2 horses owned by the same people, but different trainers, whether they'll happy to take each other on. That's Jerry Colomb and Journey With Me, both owned by Rob Core. They're at the top of the betting here. We know that Stage Star, who's entered in this race, doesn't go. We've got the likes of Bron, who was 3rd in the Brown Advisory. And then there are some other horses in here that didn't go to Cheltenham. So still slight uncertainties, Ross, I suppose. Is there something in here that is really standing out to you?
No, it's a race that by the time myself and TC do our short pods, I'll have more of a clear idea on. I'd be against Jerry Colomb, and that's not just because I like winding you up. I mean, I think he did every single ounce of the stamina test that the Browns was. I didn't think his jumping was anywhere near good enough. I thought he jumped up in the air rather than across his fences, so I'd be opposing him. City Chief is just a horse that's interested me all season. He's been good to me so far this season. He's got to step up to get to this level, but he arrives here fresh. He jumps well. He stays very well. I just thought he was interesting. And then just one a little bit further down the list, Whistle in the Dark for Laura Morgan. He's got bags to find, but he's won over 2 mile 2. He's won over 2 mile 5. She really did improve not long till May. He looks like this horse got a similar profile. You know, she went to the Cheltenham Festival, sort of people thinking that she was perhaps overstepping her grade, and proved that to be far from the point. If he's declared, he's a horse that would perhaps just interest me at a big price.
Yeah, fair play to her. She probably thinks, look, if not long till May can take his chances, why not others? She sees at home their homework and how they perform with each other. So yeah, Laura Morgan, the trainer, I have so much time and respect for. So fair play to her. I like to hope that Whistle in the Dark does take up his chances in this field. TC, then fair enough, and must plug the daily podcast that you will be doing, where you have a better knowing and understanding of who's going to be running in these races, and also we'll also know how some of the Cheltenham form is beginning to materialize a little bit as well. Is there anything in here that you want to just choose, and what do you make of Jerry Colomb? Do you think I'd be mad to keep the faith?
Well, before I get into this race, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. Firstly, Ross has not put up Thunder Rock, which is an absolute shock to me because he's done it in every race this year. Literally every race this year. Secondly, I've seen your selection, Jess, and you're not putting up Jerry Colomb. So what is going on? Are we living in the same world? I don't know what's happened. But what I will say is this race at the moment isn't a punting play for me. When we get around to the daily pods, and as Ross and Jess have touched on there, they'll be running every single day for the day ahead at Aintree. So check them out on our YouTube coming up this week. But when we get around to that, we'll have a greater idea of who's going to run. But if I was to put forward a horse, it would just be Jerry Colomb because I think he's the horse to beat. Now, I stick by the fact that I think he's very slow. He's a Gold Cup horse for the future. The race planning has been fantastic from Gordon Elliott throughout his career. But I actually thought he ran okay at Cheltenham, probably better than I expected. His finishing effort up the hill was really good. His jumping, as Ross said, wasn't great, but I don't think it was horrific. And because I think he's got such a talent advantage over the majority of these horses in the field, he would just have to be the play, especially if the rain gets in the ground on Thursday and Friday. Just looking at the others in here, Journey With Me is a horse I used to really love. when he was a novice hurdler. I've just gone off him a little bit since. I don't know. I don't think he's as talented as I thought he was, and that kind of leaves me a bit sad with Journey with Me because I thought he could be the next big thing. Bron, Jerry Colombe has the beating of him from a race back in November, and the old guard, the older horses in this race, I just don't think are good enough. So Jerry Colombe would be the tentative play at this point, but I cannot believe your selections.
That's why I asked you, do you think I'm mad? But I'm assuming that you're going to say, yes, you're mad. Do not go follow. Do not keep faith. It's not that I have lost the faith. I just think that race would have taken a lot out of him. It was such a bizarre viewing spectacle. If you're a Jerry Colombe fan, you were just devastated. Coming a couple of fences to go thinking, what is going on here? This is not the Jerry Colombe I've seen. And then out of nowhere, he sprout wings again. I don't know what it was. I don't know if he was loving life at Cheltenham. I don't know if he was given not a positive enough ride. I don't know what it was, but it was, as much as I love seeing him trying to get back to the winner that day in the real whacker and only coming down by a short head, I just think that, as we've said, if any race is going to take something out of a horse, it would have been that climbing up the hill after being so laboured early on. I just feel like I'm happy to see him go in open company next year with a view to the Gold Cup backwards. So it's going to be tough against the likes of Galopin Deschamps next year for Jerry Colombe, but my bet was at Cheltenham, and it's not that I don't like the horse anymore. I just think that's going to have taken a lot out of him. And being 7-4 favourite, it's short enough again. Journey with Me, now again, fresh, comes into this race off the back of a win. It was slightly laboured. He's not the most exciting horse to watch when he had the race in the palm of his hands, but he still made it difficult for Rachel Blackmore. He's just lost his zest at the end of races, which he had as a novice hurdler. But they're getting there with him. I think at the beginning of the season he was massively disappointing where he fell first time out. And Henry de Bromhead's horses weren't the best, but then he then was second to Impervious, and I don't think that's bad form. Went down on a sword really to a brilliant mare who won at Cheltenham, and then he franked that form as well. Just comes into this race without the worry to me of a Cheltenham Festival race taking a lot out of him. So that's why I've gone with Journey with Me. So in a race where both myself and Ross have gone against our Cheltenham selections, we'll see how they do. We'll probably have egg in our face after it. Right, we'll go on to the Marsh Chase. Run over 2 mile full furlong, an open race. This again, a hard race. Doesn't massively excite me, this one, I've got to admit. I think that it lacks a kind of quality or star appeal in this division that we've got in some of the others. So I suppose it could be quite open for something slightly more unexpected potentially, Ross. I think this could throw up a bit of a surprise. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Fakir Duduri has never been a horse I've got fully on board with, and I thought he got an odd ride at Ascot last time, went far too wide, but he's looking a little bit regressive. Picdory isn't gonna want soft ground, I don't think, in this class. Hitman just doesn't win. Fury Road has entered in the Grand National and elsewhere. Miller's Bank has looked regressive. I love Fugitive. He's been good to me all year. Sean Bowen gave feedback to Connections after the race at the standing start, cost them the win at the Cheltenham Festival. He's convinced he lost plenty of lengths there. He's a fairly big, long-legged horse. I think he took a while to find his stride, but he jumped beautifully, travelled really well. The trainer is convinced he'll stay further than this next season. So if they go hard up front, which I think there's every chance they could do, Sean Bowen keeps the ride. I can just see him still finding yet more improvement. He's a young, fairly lightly raced horse. He's been well looked after by Richard Hobson. I think he's got bags left in him yet, and I'd love to see him upset a few more fancied horses in this.
Yeah, Richard Hobson, I think, has campaigned him beautifully, hasn't he, in handicap company. It's tough for a horse to go from one big handicap to the next, and he deserves a big success after those 2 runner-up efforts at Cheltenham. I love the case for Fugitive. Tom, are you the same? Is this a race that you can pick holes at some of the lead protagonists in the betting?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's normal service resumed of Ross picking Fugitive. If he didn't pick Fugitive, I was off this pod. It was game over. I couldn't do 2 in a row. I could actually make a solid case for Fugitive as well. He was the last off my shortlist, but mainly just because I want to take on these jollies. As Ross touched on there, Picdory, the ground won't be ideal. And I also think he's better going around right-handed tracks rather than left-handed. Now, maybe that's just because I've got this agenda with Pic Dorhe. I backed him on his first UK start all the way back in 2019, and I haven't backed him since, and he's won 7 times in the interim. So, make of that what you will. But Pic Dorhe's not a horse I really want to play in here. Baku Duderi is the solid option, isn't he? He's won this race for the last 2 years. You've got to respect that. But again, I fancied him last time at Ascot, and he ran no sort of race. Maybe the return to Aintree will see him in better light, but he's hard to back on the back of that evidence. So I was going to take a chance on Fugitive, but I thought I'd take a shot on another horse at the same kind of price, around 9, 10 to 1, and that's Miller's Bank. He's saved his best for this meeting for the last 2 years, so he has looked regressive, as Ross touched on. But I don't know whether that's just a case of prepping him, getting him ready, getting him tuned up for this race at Aintree. He finished a really good third at 80 to 1 in the Aintree Hurdle back in 2021. And then he won the Manifesto last year, really impressively, by 10 lengths, beating Warlord. Now, Warlord's obviously not a phenomenal horse. He's good, but he's not great. This race, though, I don't think is full of great horses. So Miller's Bank could replicate that performance in this event. He was only 2 lengths behind Pic Dorhe in the Peterborough Chase earlier this season. So, albeit his form figures don't really stand out as a horse who's been running to his best, he stacks up reasonably well against the market leader, and he's a much bigger price. So I'll take a chance. Second time off wind surgery for Miller's Bank.
Yeah, and I'm also pleased to see that Alex Hales has had a couple of winners recently. He had a very quiet, he didn't have a winner in January, he didn't have a winner in March, and then he's had 2 winners over the last week, which I think is, just what that yard would want for confidence. But Miller's Bank, yeah, he's got a little bit to prove. He's obviously been behind Pic Dorhe, but yeah, he's been here to Aintree. He does like it. But I agree with both Ross and Tom here that there is plenty to say about taking on these favourites. I think Hitman, I heard in an interview with Paul Nicholls that he was one of the horses that did have a very hard race at Cheltenham. Even though he ran a big race, it was a hard race. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see him run here. I've gone right down to the bottom of the field from a betting perspective, and I'm going to go with Manila Drama, who is another outsider. He's got the fresh young legs. He's just an 8-year-old. Yes, he's been running at some of the northern tracks, but he's been winning and been doing just as Donald McCain and Brian Hughes would want from him. This is a class step up. It's the toughest race that he would have appeared in. But they deserve a stab at the graded races now. He's gone up to official racing 154 after playing in the mid 140s at the beginning of the season. So he's rated to be within this bunch, and he's around 20 to 1. So it'll be interesting to see how many turn up and if it's a good each way betting race or not. But I think we can all agree that we're happy to take on the favourites here in the Marsh Chase. Right, that's a second race we're looking at on Friday. The third is the Sefton Novices Hurdle, 3 mile, half a furlong. Is the trip. This is a race where Hermes Allen, who ultimately disappointed at Cheltenham in the Ballymore, he is stepping up in trip to this 3 mile, half a furlong distance. You've got some other interesting contenders in here as well that are slightly more unexposed than you could say this likely favourite Hermes Allen is in that they've sort of slowly been making their presence known in this division and now stepping into graded company. Absolute Notions didn't go to Cheltenham but ran very well second on the Dublin Racing Festival. You've got Rocco, who's winner of the Martin Pipe, in here as well, and the likes of the Carpenter for Nicky Henderson, who's just a really fascinating contender, and he's shown to be a pretty classy operator but has to step up again. We said, Ross, that if the juveniles, you don't want a juvenile to have had a hard race at Cheltenham. I suppose it's the same for a staying novice, because it's going to take out a lot of them at a young age over a staying trip on soft ground. An intermediate type novice is similar for the likes of Hermes Allen. What did you make of that run? Because Harry Cobden was very critical about the way that the tactics played out in and around him, and he wasn't best pleased with it all. Can you forgive him? Do you think that he's the class angle in here?
Harry Cobden for whinging, or Hermes Allen? Harry Cobden for whinging, yeah, of course I can, because I think in the heat of the moment you sort of say things that you perhaps don't fully think through. But I do think it was a daft comment, because he could have just gone on. Because the horse has gone on and been made plenty of use of in his races prior to that. of all the horses coming out of the Cheltenham Festival, I kind of could forgive Hermes Allen. I can see him winning this. I think he's definitely got this in his range, and I think he can perhaps, dominate things from the front. I think that's what got him beat at Cheltenham, as he sort of got muddled around with, and it was a fairly moderate ride, I think. And I suppose, Harry Cobden was brilliant on the second 2 days. I don't think he was great on the first 2 days. So I can see it. I've got to stick with the Rocco though. I mean, I thought he was really impressive to win the Martin Pipe at Cheltenham. At no point really until the final hurdle did he look like he was going to win it. He's got £6 to fine with Hermes Allen at the top, rated at 150. He's on at 144. I think there's every chance that this extra trip can bring about more improvement. I think he's a really exciting horse going forward. I think 3 Mile will be his trip. There is a concern, obviously, that he probably had a heavy enough race because he was off the bridle from a long way out. So he'd have been, running with the petrol gauge to empty at the end, I would imagine. But I just really like him. I think he's uncomplicated. If this is a big field, he's already proven he can handle a big field. I think he's got bags going for him, and I'll stick with him.
Yeah, he definitely saved me at the end of the Cheltenham Festival after quite a difficult couple of days in between the Tuesday. And yeah, brilliant performance. And Aidan Kelly said when he got off that this horse is an out-and-out stayer. I'm really looking forward to seeing him jumping a fence, actually. There's a lot to like about Rocco. Last race at Cheltenham, if anything, when you get right to the end of that after a bit of an attritional run, they'll be hoping that hasn't taken too much out of that 5-year-old as well. Tom, what do you make of some of the horses in this field that kind of have just only a couple of runs to their name? Do you think there are anything in here that could sort of raise the bar even higher in this kind of race?
Yeah, I think there are, but at the same time, I think it's really difficult to cross-compare these form lines. I mean, Iroko running in a handicap hurdle. You've got Hermes Ellen in the Ballymore. You've got loads of different horses coming in from different races, and I think it's super difficult to compare them. Generally, in races of this nature, you can find value because it's hard to compare horses, but I found it difficult here. So there's no pick, I'm afraid, in this race. I would generally, though, like horses that are fresh. However, Absolute Notions and Maximilian, who are the highest up in the market, that missed Cheltenham, I just don't like either. So it's really difficult to come down on a horse. If I had to give you one name at this point in time, it would be Mufasa, a huge each-way price. But he has to improve plenty on figures to even contend. So, yeah, I'll sit this one out, Jess.
Okay, no problem. Well, we did have a 66-1 winner of this race a couple of years ago, who turned into none other than Ahoy Senor. So we've seen big price winners of this race. He'd only had a couple of wins in maiden company, that for Lucinda Russell. I was really taken by the Carpenter when I saw him win at Newbury. I was there that day. I don't think he beat a huge amount, but I think he's the kind of horse that Nico de Boinville does really well with. He sort of smuggles him in, keeps him quiet. He's a 7-year-old and has only done a very small amount of racing. He's only ran 3 times. He's clearly had plenty of issues, but they're getting the best out of him now. It's quite a quick turnaround from the end of March when he won at Newbury. I think he would want a bit of rain as well, but I'm really interested to see him run over this trip. He'll be stepping up by another half a mile, and yeah, I like the way he goes. I hope that he's a bit of each way value around the 7-1 chance. So that's the Carpenter in the Sefton Novices Hurdle. Right, we've got the Topham over the national fences on the Friday, and we've got plenty of other races as well. Ross, do you have anything else? Any other fancies that you want to throw in for Friday?
Yeah, in the Topham, final orders for Gavin Cromwell really interest me. He ran an amazing race at Cheltenham, got completely outpaced the whole way round, was never going to be sighted, and then absolutely flew home to finish 5th in the Grand Annual. I think he's still got scope off this mark of 150. He's perhaps not in years gone by the sort of jumper you would look for the Aintree fences, but I think it's fairly agreed now that actually a low slick jumper can get away with that style at Aintree now. He's definitely in that mould. I think he's a really talented horse. This extra trip is going to suit him. The long run in from the back of the last will really suit him. Gavin Cromwell, Keith Donoghue riding. Keith Donoghue, I think, is a really good rider of a fence. So he's well on my radar for the Topham.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Love the Topham. Great race. Tom, anything that you would like to add in as well for Friday?
Yeah, just one, and that's Picard in the 220. It's a 2 mile 4 furlong handicap hurdle. Now, this selection generally relies on how much rain falls at Aintree this week. If there's bucket loads and it's soft ground, verging on heavy, then I don't want to be having any part of Picard. But if it's on the good side of soft, then Picard will be a very interesting horse in the 220 on Friday. He also has entries in a couple of the Grade 1 novice hurdles as well, and an apprentice handicap hurdle over shorter. But I think this looks the best spot for him. He's a 6-year-old. He ran well against the likes of Nappers Hill and John Bond last year. Returned with an impressive win at Chepstow in a race that's produced 5 subsequent winners at the start of this season. Then the ground went completely against him, as I've touched on. Doesn't want soft ground. Went against him at Newbury and then at Cheltenham, albeit he ran very well there to finish third. And then I like the way he put away Henri II last time out. Aintree's always been suggested as his target. He's going to love this track. He's very well treated off 132. It's just whether he gets his ground.
Okay, I'm actually going to take you on in the same race, but I'm tentative because my selection, Blenkinsop, has got 4 different entries, but I think the race that sort of made for him is the 2 mile 4 furlong handicap hurdle on Friday, because he's been doing all his racing over that intermediate trip. He's got entries in the Sefton, the Grade 1 that day. He's also got entries in the 3 mile handicap hurdle on the Saturday, and the Mersey novices hurdle over 2 mile 4 furlong on the Grade 1. So they could give a Grade 1 a go, but I think the Henry Daly team believe that off a rating of 131, he's still probably got a decent enough handicap mark to go to a handicap. He's gone shot up in the ratings. He began life in a handicap off 104, but he's been nothing short but pretty flawless in his displays in his 4 races this season. He hasn't been seen since New Year's Eve of last year, but I think they've been waiting potentially for the ground. He didn't run at Cheltenham on trials day, and I hope that wherever they go, they're going to have a good run with Blenkinsop. I've really enjoyed following his season this year. Okay, that's a couple of other selections on the Friday of Aintree. We're going to move on now to the Saturday, and we're building our way up to the Grand National, just so we'll be getting there, and we're having a real look at the selections that Ross and TC have come up with. We're going to, before we get there, we'll just touch on the Liverpool hurdle, 3 mile, half a furlong. Ross will see Marie's Rock stepping up and trip after that underwhelming run in the Mares hurdle. She probably should have always been in the Stairs hurdle, but Stairs hurdle was a bit of a unusual one in the end. We've got Tiopu, who was 3rd place in that Stairs. He's in it, as well as the Stairs hurdle winner, Sada Burley, who won this race last year. It's interesting. I find it interesting that Marie's Rock is favourite, considering how poorly she ran last time.
Yeah, but the Mares race was a muddly race as well. I'm not sure if Nico looked back over Cheltenham, he'd have that rated particularly high in terms of rides he gave a horse, and it just proves that can happen. The Stayers division, probably for the last 2 seasons now, it's just an absolute muddle. I think you probably would have as much chance of finding the winner if you just threw a dart at a dartboard, to be honest. It's certainly not a division I feel I've got any real grasp on. Time Hill, I think, is interesting in that he's clearly got bags of ability. He can't jump. He got away with it at Kempton. It was never any more than that. And I think that was almost a bit of a shame, because I think he'd have had a chance in the Stayers hurdle, but because he won at Kempton, they sort of felt inclined to continue with a horse I think they know doesn't jump, and went to the Browns. If he bounces back to anywhere near his best hurdling form from last season, I think he'll go really close. But it's a race I will try and dig down into more detail on the Friday pod with TC. But at the moment, I'm really not at all keen on anything. Time Hill would be a sort of speculative suggestion as opposed to a tip.
Yeah, fine, fair enough. Back over hurdles, interesting. Tom, sadly no Sir Gerhard. We've tried our best, but he actually ran quite well over fences last weekend. So I'm sure you've given up at this stage on that venture. Is there anything that you took out of the Stairs hurdle at Cheltenham this year that you think can run a bit better, or one that ran very well that you would like to see in here, that you'd like to tip up in here?
Yeah, I think the Sir Gerhard ship has well and truly sailed at this point, Jess, I'm afraid. Yeah, I'm going to be taking Home by the Lee. In our Cheltenham Review podcast, I mentioned that he was probably my biggest eye catcher of the week, or at least one of them anyway. Now, I presume he runs here. The fact he's drifted from 6-1 to 8-1 in the last couple of days is a slight worry in that regard. But I've seen nothing from connections saying they're going to be bypassing the event. So I assume he goes here. And if so, 8-1, I believe, is a phenomenal price. He ran as good as anything, in my opinion, in the Stairs hurdle. Made a woeful mistake. Absolutely terrible mistake at the 6th hurdle. Completely lost his back end. Lost 4 positions in the race. Was ridden away. And for many horses, that would be the end. They'd be pulled up or they just wouldn't feature. But he refound his stride, rallied up the hill, and was only beaten 3 3/4 lengths at the line. Now, as I touched on in an article I wrote after the Cheltenham Festival, Tihupu was the horse that plenty of people will take out of the race as the obvious eye catcher. He was the horse that made ground from the back, whereas all the other protagonists at the finish, apart from Cider Burley, obviously, were bang in the firing line from the outset. So Tihupu is the obvious one, and I think he'll probably go off favourite actually in this race. But I think Home by the Lee ran actually the best race in the Stayers. I thought he was the horse that, if he didn't make that mistake early on, I think he might have gone very, very close, if not winning. So 8-1, I think is a brilliant price. Actually, one of my better bets of Aintree if he goes here. So I'll definitely be taking Home by the Lee.
Okay, yeah, Home by the Lee probably didn't run his race, did he, in the Stayers? So, yeah, interesting selection there. I think Champ has been laid out for this race. Like, they didn't go to Cheltenham for a reason. Yes, he can be a bit of an enigma, but he needs to be fresh. And he will just be like that in a race where I agree with Ross. You could throw anything, a dart at this, and you probably have a case to be made for them. But Champ being fresh, I just probably just edges it for me in a race where I don't have a massive opinion. So we'll put the Liverpool hurdle to one side and we'll crack on to the Grand National. As Tom and Ross have said, they're going to do their daily podcast where they can have a real look at these, especially when we have a full set of runners and riders. But I think at this stage we'll discuss a couple of the lead protagonists from a betting perspective, and also go into depth into any other horses that in this race that really takes a fancy from an anti-post position. So let's talk about the lead players in this race, as they, I think, as they should do to be favourites for a Grand National, have extremely attractive profiles. And you've got to say that Corach Rambler, who heads it at the moment, with Derek Fox looking, you like to hope he's going to be okay to stay on board his horse who he rides so well. And he's been the making of this horse, I believe, as well, especially the last 2 Ultimas. Corach Rambler is £10 well in for this race after winning that Ultima, and he heads the betting. You've then got Noble Yates, last year's winner. He's in here off a much higher mark, but he's been laid out for this race, and he showed his class and how good he is in graded events, especially running a fine race to finish 4th in the Gold Cup. And then you've got Delta Work, the winner of the cross country. He's got a big weight himself, but ran a fine race in this to finish 3rd last year. You've got a Cheltenham Festival winner in Gaia de Menil. You've got Mr. Incredible, who ran another very eye-catching race in the Kinmure at Cheltenham. So those are some of our lead protagonists, I would say. Maybe Ross, let's talk about Corach Rambler. There must be a massive case for him, but you've got to be a brave person to go for a favourite in this race and be really confident. Despite that £10 weight pull that he essentially does have off the back of the Ultimate.
I'm not sure I agree about the favourite. I mean, Tiger Roll was a fairly short price favourite, and I thought he had outstanding credentials for the race because everything about his run style suits this race. I think firstly you've got to really, really hope that Derek Fox is going to be back ready for this on Saturday. Now, jockeys are different breed, but the fact that he's working on 48 hours to recover from a shoulder injury, to most mortal people would seem like a fairly narrow window. To a jockey, it's like having an extra month. So he should be fine. I think if Derek Fox is not on board, you've got a big problem, because I think this horse is clearly quirky, clearly takes a bit of knowing, and Derek Fox knows him very well. But I just don't see this horse's run starts setting up for a Grand National, albeit he's £10 well in, but Cloth Cap was, I think, £12 well in 3 years ago, and he couldn't convert. He's going to be ridden cold, so he's got to have luck in that nothing's going to roll on the floor in front of him and bring him down. But the bigger concern for me is the angle and distance from the back of the last to the line. He's got to negotiate the elbow. Well, he looked pretty hard to steer at Cheltenham, which is pretty much a straight run, and it's a very long run from the last to the line. So Derek Fox has got to deliver him halfway up, well, between the elbow and the line, really, in an ideal world. I think that takes the world of doing. Derek Fox is very talented, but if he delivers him like that, it's ride of the season nailed in the coffin, and he's probably already got one contender from Cheltenham. I'd love to see it. I think Connections are the best trainers of staying handicap chasing in the country. They've plotted him really well, but at the prices, I just couldn't have him on my mind, I'm afraid.
Okay, he is about 13-2, and I suppose, yeah, there is a lot going for him. He hasn't done it before. We haven't seen him over in Aintree fence. We have seen Noble Yates do it, who's our second favourite, Tom, who has, if you watch back that Grand National from last year, he was sort of given the ride that Derek Fox probably want to give Corrick Rambler, kept him out the back. He went quite wide, and I watched it earlier again, and I was thinking he was lucky. You've got to be lucky that he kept out of trouble, but it was. He kept him cold, and he smuggled that horse into it, and he suddenly was produced sort of on that inner rail, and he stayed all day, didn't he? What about his profile this year? Do you think there is that he can back it up? Is he a Tiger Roll take two?
Yeah, well, I, like many last year, couldn't have had Noble Yates. In fact, I didn't even consider him. I probably spent 5 minutes just looking at his races and then wrote him off. And he ended up proving me completely wrong. It was a phenomenal ride, and only 4 horses were actually behind him, jumping the first and second fence. And you just don't see that generally in Grand Nationals. It's horses that race in mid-div or up with the pace that generally contest the finish. But Noble Yates defied that trend last time around. I think he's gone from strength to strength ever since. And you don't always see that with national winners either. Sometimes they can be the proverbial one-trick pony where they produce their big A game on Grand National Day, and then that takes their toll for the rest of the season or career, potentially, in some horses. But Noble Yates has really impressed me this year. His many clouds chase victory at Aintree, again, I think a repeat of that effort, albeit in a completely different track, completely different race. I think that would see him bang in the firing line. And his last 2 starts at Cheltenham, he's just been outpaced and stayed on well up the hill over shorter trips. I thought his Gold Cup run was really good for a horse that in the early stages looked like he wanted no part of the race. Obviously, they went very hard, and that didn't suit him in the early stages. It did in the later stages. But I thought he ran fantastically. And although he's much higher in the weights, I've backed him post for this race at 14-1. Lovely bit of aftertime in there. So hopefully, Noble Yates will go in again and be the Tiger Roll that I hope he is.
Yeah, he's got over a stone more on his back this year, which is plenty. Whether he can defy that, whether he's improved to be able to defy that's the question, Ross. I really think that that's the biggest concern with him. Whereas the likes of Delta Work, who was a very good third in this race, he's actually a pound lower than he was last year. So considering he's coming into this off the back of that very good cross country win, they've clearly planned out his route to this exactly, known exactly what he's needed to get them there. He's probably at the weight slightly better off, considering he's had a good season as well.
Yeah, and if everything stands their ground, he'll carry £5 less as well, which is significant. I just don't think he'll stay. I don't think he stayed last time. I don't think a little bit less weight is going to make enough difference to him. And I thought his jumping he got away with a couple last time. If he's improved for that, then and learn, then absolutely. But there's every chance it can go the other way, and they don't enjoy that first experience, and they regress from there. And I take that view with him.
I suppose those are the top 3. We could talk about plenty more that have good profiles for this race. Willie Mullins is 2 horses below them, but I think at this stage, let's chat about our selections and where we've gone. That again. Possibly, and I've said this at the beginning, it is a lottery. There is so much luck that you need to try and avoid any of the dangers. It's just who's the horse that is capable of doing that. Tom, what have you been impressed with? Who do you think has got the nice sort of overall profile into this, and also at quite a decent price?
Yeah, so only 2 selections so far on my anti-post portfolio. I'll probably add a couple on the day, as you do. With the Grand National, it's good to throw a few darts at some big price runners. But Noble Yates is my number 1, without doubt. I think he's the most logical winner of the race. He's not very quirky at all. They go hard early. That will suit him. He stays the trip very well. And the one thing I didn't mention a second ago is that he actually out-battled Any Second Now. And to do that against that gutsy horse needs marking up as well. So Noble Yates is my number one. And the other horse I just want to throw into the mix, a huge price, is Velvet Elvis. Now, 7-year-olds don't generally win the National, though Noble Yates did last year, and he kind of bellied that trend. But Tom Gidney has aimed this horse at the National ever since last season, where he ran in the Irish Grand National. And that day, that was the only attempt he's had over further than 3 miles. He ran very well to finish sixth at a huge price, as just a 6-year-old as well. It was an effort that you shouldn't be overlooking. This year, he's been tipping away, won a couple of races, and then last time out in the Webster Cup over a really inadequate trip for Velvet Elvis, he finished 7 lengths behind Any Second Now. Now, that form obviously ties in nicely with this race because Any Second Now has history in the Grand National, and he'll go into this year's renewal as one of the leading fancies. He only got £3 off Any Second Now that day. In the National, he'll get a £17 swing in his favour, which definitely suits him. He jumps well, he travels nicely, he'll be up in the vanguard early on. And I think at 40, 50 to 1, Velvet Elvis has got an each way chance.
Okay, why not? I mean, all I know about Velvet Elvis, was just sort of refreshing my memory on him, is that he can be a bit of a front runner, and I'm not sure necessarily you want to be too exuberant for something like a National. So be interested to see how they ride the horse. But he's 40 to 1. You can't really go wrong with a horse of that class. Definitely, he's been showing up in some good races as they prep him for the big one. Ross, how's your anti-post selections? How have you found coming down on an anti-post horse for this race? Because obviously, year after year, you're looking for something with a little bit of value, I'd imagine. But it's become about class, hasn't it? It's become about these it's not about this old-fashioned chasers anymore. It's about who's been prepped in and who's had just about the right amount of match practice without winning too much to have the right weight to pull off a National victory.
Yeah, so my one and only anti-post bet before the last week was Our Power at a bigger price because he wasn't guaranteed to get in. We did the Ultimate Pod back in October, early November, and he just won at Ascot, and I said he was bang on my radar for the Coral Trophy, and I thought he was a horse that would step forward. When I said that, I sort of had the Scottish National in mind. I didn't think he'd get up into the weights as he has done. He missed the Coral Trophy through a small injury. Sam Thomas's yard were then out of sorts through the winter. He returned at Kempton, ran a really good race over 3 miles there, needed every yard of that. He's a really nice, economical, measured jumper. He looks an uncomplicated ride. Sam Twiston-Davies is going to take the ride. He's got good form round Aintree. I mean, even going back to his amateur days when he was on Hello Bud. I think this has got a nice profile, nice racing weight. He's guaranteed a run now. Sam Thomas, I think, is very good at targeting races. I think he has definitely come in under the radar because he's not run a lot this winter. I don't think that is entirely by design. But it might just play to his hands. And then looking this last week, two that I like at bigger prices. The Big Dog is a horse I've always had plenty of time for. I was really keen on him for the Welsh National, and they went and decided to win the Troy Town, and he carried lumps of weight in the Welsh National and still finished third. Ran a really, really good race, and then tipped up in the Irish Gold Cup last time. And I'm not for a second saying he was going to stick on and win that, but he was far from done with. And surely the biggest concern in a race of that grade was whether he'd actually have the speed to lay up early, and he did that comfortably enough. Tipped up, wouldn't have had a hard race there. It's not ideal perhaps coming into a Grand National off an unseat, but I think he's got a nice profile. And although he's high enough in the handicap, he's only going to carry 11 stone 5, having been lugging 12 stone in the Welsh National, 11 stone 12. He'll feel like he's running with a lighter weight. I like that angle for him. And then one that I do just like at a much bigger price, I mean around about 80 to 1, is Durasso. He's stayed really well when winning at Turles over 2 miles 6, and he also stayed well when finishing third in the Kerry National. Now at the weights, he comes out 6 lengths better than the winner of that, Bustleton, who then went on to run in the Coral Trophy and finished just behind Corrit Rambler. So that form ties in. He's a smart jumper. He's had plenty of class over the years, over trips of 2 mile 4. I like a horse with a bit of speed that can get a position early. He's got to prove that he's going to stay this extra mile and a bit, but he wasn't stopping at the back of the Kerry National. If anything, he was finishing stronger than the two in front of him. I think he's got a nice profile. I think his runs this year cry out that he's being lined up for something. You can't just go and plot to win a national, but I like the idea that he's been protected of his mark for something big, and I hope it's this.
Okay, so Our Power, the Big Dog, and Durasso for Ross at this stage. TC's gone for Noble Yates and Velvet Elvis. My selections I'm going to throw out there for you just quickly are Ain't That a Shame, the slightly more unknown one in the context of a Grand National. He'll probably have a support, and his price might come in a bit if Rachel Blackmore does get confirmed as his rider, but the Rachel Blackmore factor is just... it is a benefit. She's been there, she's done that. This horse is relatively unexposed for a 9-year-old. He has been brought back up and round. They've sort of experimented with his trip, and that was probably one thing that I'm slightly concerned about, whether he definitely stays. But he's a pretty good jumper of a fence. He has, I think it will be interesting to see him coming around Aintree, and he's also, I think they've just saved him just quietly, just sort of planning him out for this race, in the same way that they did with Manila Times. My next one is a horse that I actually tipped at last year, Longhouse Poet, for this race, and he was quite exuberant, I thought, in the national last year, where he ran a very good race. He was sixth, but I think Derek Keefe would have probably he's using a lot of him out, sort of nearly out in the front of the race. And I think you do want to be in a more of a mid-division position and get smuggled into it. He comes into the race this year off the back of a pretty good campaign. He was a good winner last time out, and he's definitely is a good stayer at this race as well. I think they might just ride him a little bit differently, or try and conserve his energy just that little bit this time around. And then the third horse I'm going to throw out there is Dunboyne, who I think they've just worked out that he's a stayer. He was a brilliant second in Thyestes, just beaten, just couldn't manage to get to Cathy Selected. Then ran a very good race, finished fourth at Cheltenham, where he was held up. They've essentially worked out that he's a stayer and that he needs to be held up, and that's the kind of characteristics I like to see in a national. So I think that Dunboyne is interesting. I heard Jamie Codd say in an interview the other day that he's not going to be riding at Aintree, so I wonder who will be on board Dunboyne with Gordon Elliott so slim on jockeys at the moment, and Dunboyne would be one that I'd be really fascinated to see who gets jocked up on him, and how they do go about riding them. But that quiet style will be how I like to see Dunboyne ridden for the Grand National. Look, as I've said, it is a massive lottery. You can put all the time and effort that you want to into try and find your winner, but just a bit like last year, it can just confuse you even more when things like that happen. I think best of luck in going about your selections. I don't think you're ever sort of wrong when it comes to a national case to be built. But as Ross and Tom have said, they will be back previewing those everyday's racing the day before. So Wednesday for Thursday, is that correct? Thursday for Friday and Friday for Saturday. So don't miss those podcasts. But we've hopefully taken you through the best of the action at this stage for Thursday, Friday, Saturday of Aintree. I'm really looking forward to it. A reminder that new SBK customers can get £10 in free bets by betting £10. T's and C's always apply. Subscribe to whichever podcast channel you listen to. It's great to see so many people enjoying our podcast, especially our preview ones. And make sure to return to listen to those special podcasts with Ross and TC next week.